Welcome to Business Reporter's Revolutionizing Healthcare campaign. Our healthcare system and its decision makers must improve the quality of the services while cutting the budget. But the current methods and legacies slow down processes, make treatments inefficient and expensive. How to change our toolkit, and why is it important to change our budgeting? These are the questions we're going to discuss with Forte Medical. Thank you very much for joining us today. Almost every week we see some shocking headlines about the NHS. Are these just sensationally scare stories to get your attention, or worrying signs?
I don't think they're either. I think the people on the front line of the NHS work incredibly hard. I think the problem lies further up the food chain, where there is management that find it very difficult to take decisions because there's so much going on, there are too many decisions to take. And where you have innovations like ours that could assist the NHS, save money, save time, introduce efficiencies.
So what are we talking about? How much time and money are being wasted?
Something as basic as urine specimen collection.
Yes.
We're talking about 65 million specimens a year.
Wow.
Contamination rates, which is basically a pointless urine specimen, the percentage rates for those vary from 0.38% in one area of the country to over 70%. So accuracy, getting an accurate diagnosis from your urine specimen, is actually a national lottery. If you take an average of 20% of pointless specimens, then you're looking at 45,000 a day that are not being properly read. Say 45,000 patients a day who are giving a urine specimen and not going to be diagnosed from those specimens. That might result in a retest, which is costly. It might result in a repeat appointment. That's another cost. Extra nurse time, staff time, clinical time. You add all of that together, and we know from a very detailed cost savings model that we've had put together that we can save the NHS £30 million in direct costs and 1.2 billion in efficiency savings. That takes account of all the extra time it takes to retest and potential antibiotics and so forth.
The problem the NHS has is budgetary control is very, very difficult indeed. Mm-hmm. We always think that prevention is better than cure in most cases, and the type of product we're going to be talking about today leads us a long way down that line. If it's a new product, getting it onto that contract is the hardest thing in the world. Budgets are set by the NHS, the hospitals are left to spend the money, but if that product is not listed, they can't really buy it. That's the biggest problem.
At the moment, it costs 9p to use a bottle like this for a urine specimen, and this is 87p. So where we save, money is saved using the Peezy Midstream, which is our first product. The budget that pays for it is not the budget that will benefit from the savings. So the silo thinking and the silo budgets in the NHS are actually preventing progress in adoption of new products. To get this into the NHS, we first of all talk to nurses and patients, and they say, yes, this is great, I'm not going to get my hands dirty, I'm not going to have to come back for a retest. But then we also have to go and speak to the microbiology lab, and they say, oh, we're already using this, or we're doing that, or we can't afford it. But if you do get them on side, which we do, then you have to go to the procurement, and they say, we're not spending money on urine collection, we don't need to, because the buyers are not buying for clinical outcomes, they're buying to save money. Now, if the money saving was linked to clinical outcomes in a more comprehensive fashion, it would be easier to get something like this into the system.
So talking about the clinical outcomes, how are the patients being affected? Are there some sorts of diseases that are not being treated properly because of that?
There are about 30 million cases of urinary tract infection in the UK every year, and the guidelines suggest empirical prescribing, which is that you will be given a broad spectrum antibiotic which may or may not work. That will mask the symptoms, but then it won't treat the underlying cause, which will re-emerge. And this was actually discussed in the Houses of Parliament on the 28th of October last year, because urinary tract infection is not being adequately promptly treated, so it's getting worse. When urinary tract infection gets worse, it can wreck lives, literally wreck lives. You also have pregnancy. Now, antenatal checks, you can have anything between 5 and 12 urine tests while you're pregnant. If you miss glucose or protein, you might miss gestational diabetes or preeclampsia. These are really important conditions. 87p to get that kind of thing right, to me, is very little, because it can ultimately save costs, save lives, and deal with something right first time.
Where do we get it wrong? Why is it that if you're gathering urine, for example, in traditional way, like this why do we get the wrong diagnosis?
What we're promoting here is right first time treatment, analysis, diagnosis, and preventative medicine. The only way the NHS is really going to sort itself out is by spending money on prevention, because prevention is much safer than cure.
So let's talk about the solution then. What is your solution? What are you suggesting? And why would it work better?
Right. This beautiful thing is a Peezy Midstream. Okay. And this is the third iteration of it. It's very highly engineered, looks like just a funnel. But it works with both the tube that is normally used, and this is the tube that goes into the urine analyzer. So this will also fit.
So you're given this by the doctor?
Yeah, you would be given this, but we want them to be given this.
Yeah.
So what happens, if you're a woman, you put it against the body. If you're a man, you put it over the loo. And the way it works, it's very cleverly engineered, a little compressed sponge there.
Okay.
So when the urine goes in, the first 8 to 10 mils comes out of that sponge. The sponge expands and pushes your midstream into the tube.
So you do get the midstream?
You get the midstream.
Okay.
And then the excess comes out through the separate duct here. So this is designed to work between 10 and 40 mils a second, won't overflow. And when you've finished, you count to 10 to let that little sponge drain. You take it out, you unscrew this goes into the bin, and that goes dry tube, dry patient, dry floor, dry loo. When you think how much the NHS has spent on the Clean Your Hands campaign, and yet they still expect patients to soil theirs in order to give a specimen from which they're going to be diagnosed, it's bonkers. So that goes to the lab, it goes straight into the urine analyzer. Now, I've been to major hospitals, and in the microbiology lab, I've seen big bags full of urine samples, and some poor guy with rubber gloves who's pouring those into that to go into the machine, pouring that into that.
Oh, really? So this is ready to go into the machine straight away?
This is ready to go straight into the urine analyzer. There's no transfer.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
So, and you
so
don't get
the efficiency is it's huge. You've got the right specimen, a dry, dignified patient.
Yeah.
And if you're pregnant, you can't see what you're doing.
Exactly.
You can feel that's against body. You can feel it in place, and it happens automatically. 87p. And you cut out retesting, you cut out all that cleaning, you cut out nurses or lab technicians having to transfer urine. This is modern medicine. This is urine collection for the 21st century.
So it sounds...
Well, what we need are some champions, some people who really promote this, who actually understand the benefits. The cost of antibiotics for treating infections is absolutely enormous. And Giovanna touched on earlier on, it's difficult for the purchasing people because they're comparing 9p with 87. They're not comparing 9p with the cost of antibiotics that you have to use as well to cure infections. And that's a horrendous amount of money. So I think by the time we get a few champions promoting the product, that'll make a big difference.
Because on the statistics front, with the 65 million and then the contamination rate, the contamination rate averaged out to about 20%. Now that's 250,000 specimens a day that are being taken, 20% contamination, 45,000 people a day are not being accurately diagnosed from their urine. 45,000 people a day
are being affected.
Are being affected by this, yeah. When you look at those stats, you think it isn't only urine, this is liquid gold that is carrying information to treat that patient.
Do you have any examples, good examples that will demonstrate that, for instance, that the use of the traditional method of gathering urine wasn't very efficient and led to wrong diagnosis, maybe?
Well, we have a story we were told by a midwife about a woman who was pregnant and her glucose levels were off the charts, and they gave her a Peezy and her sample was absolutely normal. And when they got to the bottom of it, they found that although they were giving her one of these to take home and bring in, she had been peeing into a jam jar and pouring it into there, and so her sample was contaminated with sugar. We've also had a call from a woman who was hospitalised during her first pregnancy and didn't want this to happen, the second one. She found us on the internet and we sent her some Peezys, which she used. Now, you can get Peezy on prescription, so she asked her consultant to prescribe enough for the rest of her pregnancy, and she said it was amazing. Before the Peezys reached her, she had been at the hospital, and she'd given them a sample. A lot of people are asked to just pee into a bowl, and the bowl then gets given to somebody, and it goes and sits on a shelf for a while until someone's got time to transfer it into a tube and send it to the lab. And she sat there watching her urine specimen in this bowl thinking, what's happening to it up there? It's getting warm, it's getting a mixed growth, it's being contaminated, and then they think they're going to diagnose from it.
Well, that sounds like a perfect solution to me. Why is it not obvious to the NHS, for instance, or other healthcare systems?
I think I don't know if you would agree, George, I think it's the silo decision-making and silo budgets.
Yes, it really is. I think the company have taken a sensible approach by trying the export market first. And once the export market takes off, I think it'll automatically come back into the UK. ABHI, or Trade Association, have been terribly helpful in organising exhibitions overseas, and you were in one in Texas quite recently.
Yes, we've been to Texas with the ABHI twice, and we have sat in front of clinical directors of major healthcare providers and procurement directors, and I give them a little presentation and they say, when can we have it? Because the first thing they say is targeted prescribing. That's the very first thing they say. And so 2 visits into Texas, we've got inquiries about lead times, about costs, when can we have it? We've now got stock over there. We sold more to the States last year than the UK. We've now got distributors in Europe, and we've had a very serious inquiry from Australia this week. And I think we're going to have to turn our focus onto the export market because, you know, the company needs revenue with the best will in the world. You know, we can't keep taking in investment. We need revenue, and the revenue will have to come from elsewhere because the appetite for innovation per se in the NHS is enormous, but actually getting it adopted is very difficult. I was told by one of the directors of the National Innovation Accelerator this week that one of my problems is that where trusts have farmed out, subcontracted their microbiology to a private lab, it's costing more. And in order for the private lab not to look at pointless samples, they've implemented an additional pathway for the specimens to be checked before they go to the private lab, so that the pointless ones are then thrown away. And I said, well, what happens to the patients whose samples have been chucked out? Answer, there has been none as yet.
Wow.
And the reason we've been successful in the States is the insurance system's completely different. They measure every single product that's used, and they can cross-reference if there's a problem with too many antibiotics being used. And I think that really is one of the reasons your Texas thing is succeeding.
Thinking about the future, are you optimistic? Do you think that finally the NHS, for instance, here in the UK,
I'm hugely optimistic. I mean, firstly, because I think the market is enormous. I know I'm wrong about many things, but I know I'm right about this. And we are developing other products. We've developed a first stream product for novel early stage cancer tests, and we're collaborating with a major university on a clinical trial for Peezy first stream. We're looking at a sports dope urine collection kit. And eventually stool, which I won't go into. But yes, we will have a portfolio of products, and there is an appetite and there's very much a need.
But this will be the flagship product, no question about that. And I'm absolutely convinced it will catch on, and fairly quickly too.
Yes, I agree with you, and I hope that it will be implemented sooner rather than later. Thank you very much for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.